Singapore Stories with Eugene Loh.
Life is so different when you're actually honest with yourself and when you're open with other people. And so I'm just really enjoying myself these days, and I see every day as a blessing, as opposed to many of the years when I was working so hard to get the best grades, to get the best job, to reach all the targets, to impress everyone, to just look so good on the social media, on LinkedIn, everywhere. And when you're always trying to be the very best every day, it's difficult.
A former globe-trotting expatriate, he's experienced isolation, pressure to overachieve, and depression, and only recently began to seek help and be true to himself and to others. He's now dedicated to raising awareness and eliminating the stigma around the phenomenon of executive loneliness, and he's just released a #1 international best-selling book about it. Today's Singapore Story belongs to Managing Director of EGN Singapore, Nick Johnson.
I was born in Sweden in 1975, and my mum and dad lived then in a pretty small city. My dad was working first in construction as a construction worker, but later on he got more passion for drawing, so he became a building architect. And my mum at the time was basically working in textiles, and later on opened her textiles and embroidery and interior decoration shop.
What kind of child were you, Nick?
I was always very creative. I was a bit naughty, always out looking for things to do. And, the kind of naughty boy who would throw that rock that break a window and go home and get blamed by the parents and things like that. So when I look back at those things, I feel a bit shy.
Okay. Besides being a playful boy, what were some of your early interests and passions?
As most children and boys especially, I guess it was sports. I played football, I played a bit of ice hockey and so on. But already at a young age, around 11, 12 years old, it was really about business and starting to make money.
Oh, why is that? Can you explain why, looking back?
I remember having a desire to get some possessions, like maybe I wanted a new bicycle and I wasn't given it from my parents. So I was already then thinking, how could I get this bike? How can I get it if I don't get the money from my parents? How can I get it then? So that then started this burning desire of wanting to earn some money already as a child.
Okay. So our parents couldn't give it to you, or they wouldn't?
A bit of a combination, I would say.
Yeah,
I grew up in a Swedish middle-class family, so they could have afforded it if they wanted to, but it was also as the discipline so that I wouldn't be too spoiled as a child, which I'm quite grateful for. And it also taught me that if I wanted something, I had to be patient and I had to work for it.
All right. Very good lesson to learn when you're a kid. So what did you start with?
I started to do some jobs, and in Sweden it's quite common that as a child leading up to Christmas, you sell Christmas magazines, and you normally start to sell just to your relatives, to your cousins and so on, and then you earn a small commission on those. And I got the taste for that. So after I had sold to my relatives, I started to knock the doors of my neighbors. And then I got more courage. So I walked around the block. And before I knew it, I walked all around town selling these magazines and newspapers before Christmas. And I remember that I was awarded already as a 12-year-old as one of the best salespeople, earning the highest commission in the whole country of Sweden. And that gave me then as a child, not only the money, but a lot of confidence in myself that, oh, wow, I can earn this money. I can buy my own stereo. I can put some money in my bank. And that was a wonderful feeling.
Okay. So with a reputation like that, I'm sure your parents didn't disapprove.
Yeah, they were proud of me. And when I later on, at the age of 13, I wanted to open my own little computer shop in Sweden, they were supportive of me, and I did that together with a friend.
Oh, okay. So you've always had a knack for sniffing out opportunities or business opportunities. I mean, what was your approach at that time?
So
or was it like, yeah.
I lived in a small village of around 60,000 people. And it was just at the time when the computers started to be popular. So if we're looking back here, it's late 80s, and the Commodore 64, the personal computers just started. And I bought basically from Stockholm, then the biggest city, some of those, and I sold them at a higher with a mock-up in my small village. And it was then when computer gaming started. And I quickly learned that I could earn some money on that. So that was my approach, really, to buy and mark it up and in a smaller village where the items were not really available.
And I'm sure that must have been really attractive for a kid at that age. What about school? Was that a thing, or was it, was earning money a priority?
Earning the money was really a priority. That's where I put in my passion and so on. Okay. I passed the subjects at school. I didn't at this point of time excel in them. I was pretty average, I would say.
Okay. So do you remember what sort of challenges or difficulties you went through?
In school, I remember struggling a little bit with reading, especially the languages was a struggle. Swedish language was difficult, but English language was even more difficult. And to complicate matters more, at that time we had to learn a third language, and that was German, and I struggled even more with that.
Okay. I meant making money.
Making money
Did you have any problems?
No, I didn't have much problem. I think when a child is trying to make those efforts, I mean, the parents are supportive, friends are supportive, and so on. So that was really not the problem. And as long as I found new products, new games, new computers to sell, and I found new ways of selling them also. And I guess as an innocent child, I could get away with putting up, notices on billboards. I could advertise in the local newspaper, in the classified session, and things like that. So I managed to get the word around by, promoting the computers, by not spending much money, and people were calling, and it was starting to get busy.
Yeah. And at that age, right, once you have vision and your focus is very clear, you can always do very well because you don't need sleep.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And especially in Sweden, in summertime when you have 20 hours daylight.
Today's Singapore story belongs to Nick Johnson, and as Managing Director of EGN Singapore, is passionate about matching senior executives in confidential peer groups where they can help each other face challenges and identify opportunities. Nick himself has worked across Asia, Australia, and Europe, representing major international firms in general management, direct sales, and marketing. He's also just released a book, a #1 international bestseller called Executive Loneliness, and he continues to share his Singapore story with us. In just a while, I'm Eugene Loh for Singapore Stories on CNA 938.
Singapore Stories with Eugene Loh.
The computer shop especially kept me focused for about 2 years, and until I turned 15 years of age and I was allowed to buy my first motorbike, and that's where I spent the money on. And I was one of the few children who could afford then to buy a brand new motorbike for my own money. That was no one else around who could do that at that time.
The former globe-trotting expatriate, he's experienced isolation, pressure to overachieve, and depression, and only recently began to seek help and be true to himself and to others. He's now dedicated to raising awareness and eliminating the stigma around the phenomenon of executive loneliness, and he's just released the #1 international best-selling book about it. Today's Singapore story belongs to Managing Director for EGN Singapore, Nick Johnson.
And that sort of sidetracked me a bit, and I got suddenly very interested in driving the motorbike then, and as a teenager then, with that comes also girls, and then I was getting a little bit of a naughty boy again as I was as a younger child, and this came back, and I then lost focus on the selling, the entrepreneur side, the business side for a few years actually, until it later on came back in me from time to time as well.
Okay. So what happened? I mean, during those few years, you lost this entrepreneurial spirit, obviously had the time of your life, but then what happened to make you kind of like go back to, you graduated, did you go back to school, or was it like business from then on?
So after high school, I wanted to earn money, and to study for a few years at university and so on didn't really appeal to me. And coming from a reasonably small village, not many people, not many of my friends at least, were studying at university, so that didn't cross my mind. So I started to work as a construction painter, and then the way to earn money that in that job, you had to work extra hours. I signed up for everything I possibly could, additional jobs, working over the vacation, evenings, weekends, whenever they had something. So I managed to earn a decent income, but it was really hard work for a few years there. Not much room for creativity apart from raising your hand and then working more hours. So that was what I did. And it was only later on when I wanted to take a job in Dubai, and I didn't get the job because my English language was not good enough. And that's what then opened my eyes for being really hungry to learn English. And it was 1998 I went to Australia to try to learn English.
But after high school, why work for others? I mean, you've had your taste of business success.
Yes, but I didn't really have a business idea or a business model at that time. I didn't have any capital to start up. I was no longer an innocent child who could run a computer shop in my parents' garage.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. So that pause kind of like slowed you down a little. But then you decided you developed a taste for working overseas. How did that come about?
Yeah, so when I went to Australia in 98 to learn English, I went there with indication of studying for 3.5 months to pass some basic tests. And then I was hoping that I would be able to get a job in Dubai or somewhere overseas in the painting industry. That was still my target at that time. But over in Australia, where I studied English was at the university, and I was suddenly exposed to the campus and other students who were studying at university, and everyone was asking me, "So Nick, what do you study at university?" I said, "No, I'm here to learn English only." And that sort of then opened my mind, and I started to think maybe I should study at university. And that's what I did. I actually remained there to not only do a bachelor's degree, but I did a master's degree as well here on the Gold Coast in Australia. So that opened up my international career.
Okay.
My journey at university was also a bit of a roller coaster, because when I started it, I didn't really know what I should study. And I could think back of my computer shop, my interest in computers. So I signed up for a Bachelor of Computer Science. And my first semester was a complete disaster, because I sat in those classes and suddenly I was to learn programming, Visual Basic and so on. And the language was really, really complicated. So I failed some of my classes in the first semester, and I actually went back home to Sweden, and I cried some tears and I felt like a failure. But then I regrouped myself, got some confidence, and I went back after one semester's break to Australia Australia, and I decided to study business and marketing instead. And I quickly got myself a scholarship, and then I graduated actually as topping several of my classes, both in the bachelor and my master's, while remaining the scholarship all the way through.
Wonderful. So you did that purely by the power of self-motivation?
Yes, I did. And also I think by finding the right match, it just shows how important it is to do something you're passionate about as well, and where you feel you are good also.
True. Yeah, reconnect with your basic passions, right? That always works. And so you did very well in school, and then you moved to Asia. Tell me about your time in Asia and what you did.
Yeah, so because I've been living then in Australia for a few years, and I went back home over Christmas, summer break and so on to Sweden, and I always stopped over in Asia, and it tended to be transiting in Hong Kong or Singapore or Bangkok. So those were the three cities that I was exposed to, and I tried to take every opportunity of a stopover also to meet up with some friends there, open up some doors. And since I studied marketing and business and advertising, I started to meet with some people in the advertising and PR industry in those cities. So when I graduated in 2004, I had already some connections. And when I then sent my CV to a few cities, I got the best response from Bangkok. So that's where I ended up in 2004. I moved to Thailand.
And then you traveled quite a bit, right? You moved to London, and within a year, and then within another year moved to Vietnam. Why the rapid travels and moves?
At that time in Thailand, I worked for an advertising company, and my ex-wife at the time worked for one of the big accounting firms, and they moved her over to London for some training, and I followed her there. But I was only back in Europe for 7-8 months when I got an attractive job offer from Vietnam from a Swedish cosmetic company. And it was just too good of an offer to be able to resist. So I went over and took it in Vietnam and remained for quite some years in Vietnam.
Yeah. What kind of job was it?
It was with a Swedish company called Oriflame. They sell cosmetics, direct selling, a bit like Amway New Skin style of company. So it was very exciting times. We're talking 2006 in Vietnam, fast growth of the country, the economy, and it was just opening up. People started to get appetite for fashion and cosmetic and so on. So it was a very interesting job. I was in charge of the sales then for Vietnam.
Today's Singapore story belongs to Nick Johnson, who is the managing director of EGN Singapore. And through his own experiences working around the world, he has identified the feelings of isolation and depression amongst business leaders and high-achieving executives are much more widespread than we think. And he's written a #1 international best-selling book about it. More information over at executivelenelinessbook.com. Today's Singapore story belongs to Nick Johnson, and his Singapore story continues after the news. That's in about 5 minutes. I'm Eugene Loh for Singapore Stories, CNA 938.
Singapore Stories with Eugene Loh.
It's very much a people's business with direct selling, organizing event and catalog launches, product launches and so on, being close to the people. And yeah, it really suited me being a people person myself and being hungry for new cultures, countries and so on. It really suited me, actually. There was not many foreign companies then. Oriflame was the first direct selling company in Vietnam at the time, and it was very difficult for people to even find cosmetics and so on to get something imported. So there was very exciting times and to work there. Yeah.
Through his own experiences working around the world, he has identified the feelings of isolation and depression amongst business leaders and high-achieving executives are much more widespread than we think. Modern work culture encourages executives to project success and achievement when in fact thousands actually suffer in silence and denial. And this topic is close to his heart, and he's written a #1 best-selling book about it called Executive Loneliness. Today's Singapore story belongs to Managing Director of EGN Singapore, Nick Johnson.
I worked for a French fashion company for my last few years in Vietnam, and they moved me over to Indonesia, which was an even larger market for them. They were selling mainly handbags, and I moved over then to head office in Indonesia with them to work closely with the CEO of the company to look at which markets to expand and so on, and also on a project to change the company culture of their business in Indonesia.
Okay. And I understand that it was that period that was actually quite difficult for you. In what way?
Yes, it was because just as we had moved over to Indonesia and my ex-wife and I had settled down, our son, who was now 5 years of age, had entered school and so on, finally found a house and the furniture and set up everything. And then my company, I at this time had worked for almost 5 years, was sold, and a lot of us was laid off. So here we were in a new city and without really knowing people, and thought that this was going to be our new home. And suddenly I was let go. And it was very challenging for me to take this. And I did what I could to protect my ex-wife and my son. I asked them to please leave this to me, let me deal with it, let me try to find a new job. And they went back home to Sweden at that time because at least they could have some place to stay with their parents, and my son could go to school in Sweden and so on. So that was not very wise of me looking back. I tried to deal with this by myself.
What happened then?
I was quite lonely in Indonesia then, but after a few months, I managed to get a great job as general manager for a big medical company managing hospitals and clinics in Indonesia. It was a great job, but I was quite worried. I was anxious. I was thinking that maybe something will happen. Maybe I fail my probation. Maybe I will be let go. So I kept telling my ex-wife, please just remain in Sweden until my probation has passed. When it had passed after 6 months, I said, just give me another few months again. I'm not really sure if this is the right path. And so I was just so anxious, waiting for something to happen. And that my ex-wife and son never moved back to me in Indonesia. And after about a year, or almost a year and a half, actually, I didn't feel good about the job. So I went in and resigned. I just felt that I was not ready for it, basically.
And Nick, you just published a book on executive loneliness basically about how very often it's the managerial executives who feel the most stressed and depressed in their jobs. I mean, where did this or inspiration or the impetus for this book come about? Your own personal experience, obviously, but when did it start?
Yeah, it built up. It was the feelings I had inside me when I worked in the various countries, and the scenario which I just explained, what happened to me in Indonesia, and which I then kept quiet about. And as in my new job, I then worked with other senior executives in confidential peer groups, and I was listening to them, and I could just hear and feel how lonely they were in their decisions. And I could see how I walked through some very, very challenging and difficult times myself without having anyone to talk to about it, and that it was the same for them. But what really sparked me to then write this book was when a friend and colleague of mine died of suicide in Singapore in 2019, and we had no idea what was going on. We thought everything was fine, and suddenly he was gone, and that was the big eye-opener for me.
Tell us about your move to Singapore.
Yes, so after I had resigned from my job in Indonesia, I was looking around for various projects and works to do, and EGN got their eyes up for me, a company that organized confidential peer groups. So I started to work for them in 2017, and they moved me to Singapore in January 2018. This was a move that I was very excited about because I knew inside me that I was not really well. I knew that I needed to recover. I knew I needed to speak to professionals, and perhaps that help was not really available in Indonesia. So I had hope that in Singapore I will be able to solve this.
Tell me about your time in Singapore. I mean, what were the highs and lows? Were there more highs than lows, or the other way around?
So coming into Singapore, it was then again a new country for me, a new job. I didn't know many people, so it was a new place for me. So the first few months was very challenging. I struggled quite a lot, getting my head around the work and so on. But once I figured that out after about 6 months, Singapore has been wonderful for me. It was everything I was hoping for. The professional help was there. I decided to open up. I decided to not keep my secrets. I told doctors what happened to me. I told them what I felt. I went to see therapists. I joined a support group where I could speak about my challenges, and I could see and hear that I was not alone. So personally, I sorted myself out, and then the work with EGN has just been wonderful. So it's been a very good move for me.
Today's Singapore story belongs to Nick Johnson, a managing director of EGN Singapore, who is now in recovery himself in his 3rd year. He's also an International Coaching Federation, or ICF, coach who loves to work with executives to help them with their career and lifestyle choices. He's also written a book about his own struggles with depression and loneliness, and the pressure to work, to overachieve and to look, perfect all the time, called Executive Loneliness, and it's a #1 best-selling book as well. More information over at executivelenelinessbook.com. And Nick's Singapore story continues in just a while. I'm Eugene Loh on CNA 938.
Singapore Stories with Eugene Loh.
I went through a period when I struggled to find a new job, and I struggled with being honest to myself why it happened. I was struggling to cover up the facade, trying to look good on the outside, my profile, and I wanted it to look like I didn't lose my job. The stigma associated with being terminated from a job for many men is hard. So, you could say on 2 instances I went through that without really being honest with myself and other people. And that was just buried inside me, and I needed to deal with this and work it out.
A former globe-trotting expatriate, he's experienced isolation, the pressure to overachieve, and depression, and only recently began to seek help and be true to himself and to others. He's now dedicated to raising awareness and eliminating the stigma around the phenomenon of executive loneliness, and he's just released a #1 international best-selling book about it. Today's Singapore story belongs to Managing Director of EGN Singapore, Nick Johnson.
So for 1 year, basically, I came to Singapore in 2018, started to work on myself, but not to the point where I was speaking about this. What happened then in 2019 when I lost my friend, I called up his parents and his brother, and I had a conversation with them, and I asked them, what can I do? How can I help you? And what they said was, shout this out loud, basically. They wanted me to speak about what had happened so that we could prevent this from happening to other people. And that's what I promised to do. And that's when I started to share on my social media, on LinkedIn and Facebook and so on, my story. I shared that I've also gone through a difficult time, and I kept it secret. Now I will talk about this. And that's when many things opened up. People started to talk to me about it. And since that, it's just been a wonderful journey where I've been supporting others who've gone through difficult times. And by me speaking up, I'm helping myself as well.
Let's talk about the time when you started to seek help. What made you do that when for so many years you just kept it inside?
I just couldn't bear it any longer, basically. I tried to cover up everything, but eventually I was breaking down. My health was letting go. I started to form bad habits. I lost appetite of exercise. I started to eat bad. I gained a lot of weight. I started to consume too much alcohol. And with all of these sort of poison in my body, I was spiraling down quickly until I couldn't bear it any longer. And then I decided to start to speak up to a few people, including a doctor. I also then had met a woman who became my new wife. And I told her how I felt and what was going on inside me. And that gave me then the confidence to also join a support group in Singapore where everyone else was talking about their challenges. So that's how I tackled it head on. And that was the big shift in me.
And obviously, you know, we want people who may be in your situation or were who are in the situation that you were before. Hopefully it didn't get so bad. We want them to be able to recognize that they can and should seek help before it gets worse, right? And obviously, I suppose the book Executive Loneliness is to help shed light on your experience and encourage people to do that. So tell us more about this book.
Yes. So basically, the book has my journey in there. It also has the journey of other senior executives, and I interviewed also therapists and psychologists, and I based it all also on research and studies and surveys of senior executives based in Singapore. So while we first, of course, we identified there is a huge problem there, and our aim is to remove the stigma. It's okay to talk about this, but the real purpose of the book also is to show some guidelines there, because people, when they're going through a challenging time, might feel a bit lost. They don't know who they should talk to. They're worried. And my research also shows that they don't want to talk about this with the company. They don't want to tell the boss because they're worried that they're going to perhaps not be up for the next promotion. The boss will think there's something wrong with them, maybe demote them, or it won't be good for their career, basically. People are also scared to go and see a specialist, a doctor, a therapist. They're worried that this would be imprinted in the medical record and so on. So therefore, it's just under the carpet. And my purpose then of the book is really to show that there is a way. There's all these confidential, anonymous support groups, no matter what issue there is. And a lot of them are free, available. And in my book are phone numbers, helplines, all of these tools. So there, basically, you can say that the book is a step-by-step book for someone who may be suffering, or maybe they have a friend or a colleague who is suffering. Then this book is supposed to be a tool for this.
And the first big step, of course, is to recognize there is a problem and to be able to seek some help for it. But as you mentioned, and it's very true, I mean, most people in high-ranking positions believe that they have to be machines. And for some reason, they refuse to seek help or refuse to believe that they need help. So the first step really is to seek and to look for that help. But how does one get past that? They often think about like others' perceptions of them. But when you go and see someone, nobody has to know, right?
Yes, that's right. And I mean, the first step, and I have 5 pathways in my book. And the first one is taking stock, which, yes, that means to look at yourself and an honest look at yourself to see, you know, what is wrong with me, what is happening here. And once you have that issue, it is to ask for help, to take that to someone. Perhaps you have a close friend that you can rely on, or if you don't, then there's so many doctors and therapists here. And there's a good thing perhaps with the pandemic here that you don't have to go and see a psychologist in a place, in a physical location these days. You can have your first appointment over a Zoom or over a phone call or video call. So in that sense, no one else need to know. And all these tools are out there. And so why not just take this first step and have a first conversation?
Yeah. Nick, tell us about your own personal, journey to who you are today.
I would say, having lived and worked in 7 countries, then it's been a roller coaster journey. I think I've had high highs and had low lows. And I wish perhaps looking back that it was a little bit more steady. It's been really hard, especially for myself, to have this journey without really speaking honestly and openly with anyone. It's only since 2019 when I started to speak openly, I really feel a lot better about myself. I feel that no matter what challenge I'm facing these days, I will first try to, ask some friend or someone for help. And if there's no one around me who has the answers, I will seek for an expert. So that is what I learned. And life is so different when you're actually honest with yourself and when you're open with other people. And that is, so I'm just really, really enjoying myself these days. And I see every day as a blessing, as opposed to many of the years when I was working so hard to get the best grades, to get the best job, to reach all the targets, to impress everyone, to just look so good on the social media, on LinkedIn, everywhere. And when you're always trying to be the very, very best every day, it's difficult.
Okay. So obviously, Nick, you're very happy, very fulfilled today. Tell us what you're doing in order to do this, to feel this way, or even to get better.
A big part of my recovery was getting healthy. As I mentioned, I had put on weight. I was not consuming the best food, and I was having some bad habits. I had to break those, and I'm maintaining these habits today. There's now 3 years into my recovery. I'm still eating healthy. I'm exercising, and I'm making sure I sleep well, looking after my recovery and so on. And that is the foundation for everything. And because you have this saying called gut feeling, and it means that what our belly is linked with the brain and how we feel. So that is the foundation, that you have to have that right. And that for me is very, very important.
What else are you doing? I mean, these days when you hit a snag, when something, when the pressure gets too much, where there's stress, what do you do? I mean, do you still continue speaking to the people that you're familiar with? I mean, what else do you do?
I have all these tools now surrounding me to use, and it can be meditation, for example, which I learned through my mental health support group, and I also learned it through some of the therapists. I belong to some groups where we do meditation and mindfulness and so on, and this just makes a big, big difference in my life. I also like nature, to running, walking, cycling in the nature helps me. So I look out for the warning signals. If I feel that I'm a bit too tired or burnt out, I will make up some time and sleep in and tell some people around me that I just need a break. I will sleep 1 more extra hour this night, rather than trying to be the tough Nick and always be there on time, always stand up. Rather than doing that, just be honest. If we're not feeling well, then take that time to feel well and feel connected with ourselves, and then I move forward.
Yeah. Be kinder to yourself, right? Be compassionate to yourself as well. And, positive distractions, right? I also hear, I mean, you also support your local community and do some social work as well. I mean, I'm sure that's very beneficial also. Tell us how that works for you.
Yes. I mean, I'm so grateful for my recovery journey and, the support, that others gave me, for me to recover so quickly. And it was a quick turnaround when from really ill to very well. And I learned quickly from the people who helped me. They said, in order to keep it, you have to give it away. And I was thinking, what do they mean with that? Well, what it means is that I was given this gift of recovery. And for me to remain well and be in this great spirit, I need to constantly help others also. So that is what I do, and I'm a supporter of several organizations in Singapore, where I spend many of my early mornings being out as a volunteer and supporting the community when other people are going through a challenging time. And as you can imagine, the last 1.5 years with the pandemic and some restrictions around socializing, there's been a lot of people suffering.
And these days you also speak professionally. I mean, as a coach.
Yes,
how did that come about, and what do you do?
Yes, I mean, I've given my keynote quite a lot on, which is basically a summary of the book. I give that to various business organizations. And yes, I also am a coach these days. I can only take on a handful of clients on one-on-one coaching to help them go through their journey. If they need a hand, I'm there. So that is also helping me by helping others to grow them up and to see them also coming out stronger. That gives me confidence and hope as well.
Today's Singapore story belongs to Nick Johnson, who is the managing director of EGN Singapore, and through his own experiences working around the world, he has identified the feelings of isolation and depression amongst business leaders, and high-achieving executives are much more widespread than we think. Modern work culture encourages executives to project success and achievement when, in fact, thousands actually suffer in silence and denial. And this topic is close to Nick's heart. In fact, he's written a #1 best-selling book about it called Executive Loneliness. You can get more information over at executivelonelinessbook.com. And if you have a story to share with me or know someone who does, email me at eugene@mediacorp.com.sg. I'm Eugene Loh for Singapore Stories on CNA 938.